So what exactly happens when you let a bunch of totalitarian dictators run around and do just about anything they want without really trying to stop them? Well, stick around because that's what we're going to talk about today in Mr. E's classroom. Hey ladies and gentlemen, Mr. E here. Today we're going to talk about the coming of war. Specifically, we're talking about World War II here. The question we want to be able to answer at the end is, what led to the outbreak of war in Europe and Asia? Grab your pencil and paper, get ready to take some notes. Hopefully by the end of this video you'll have a good answer for that question. If you'll remember, prior to the outbreak of World War II, there were a few pretty important things happening around the world, especially in Europe. Remember that number one, there was a lot of bitterness left over after World War I. Second big thing was that there's the rise of totalitarian leaders or dictators all over the place, Europe, Asia. And the last thing, number three, is that most of the country, like the United States, was really suffering from the Great Depression. In Asia, Japan was really looking to expand. The military leaders, including Hideki Tojo, are really trying to get as many resources from all around Asia as they possibly can to feed factories in the home islands of Japan. This goes on for a little while. They slowly take more and more territory. Then everything sort of kind of comes to a head in 1937 with an incident that's been called the Rape of Nanjing. Nanjing was the capital of China at the time, and what happened was when the Japanese tried to take that city, they wound up slaughtering 200,000 civilians. Not military people, but civilians. 200,000 just normal Chinese. This really didn't set well with, of course, China, but a lot of the rest of the world, including places like the Soviet Union. People started to realize that this Japanese expansion was going to be a problem at some point. It was only going to be a matter of time. The big question is, how did the United States respond to this? The short answer is, the United States really doesn't want to get themselves involved in any other kind of war. In fact, they pass what are called the Neutrality Acts. In 1935, 1936, and in 1937, Congress passes laws that pretty much forbid the United States to get involved with countries that are at war. Specifically, they refuse to sell any kind of weapons or other war supplies to countries that have declared war on somebody or have had war declared on them. Over in Europe, you have two countries that are starting to get a little bit on the antsy side. You have Germany and Italy. Let's talk about Germany first. The first major thing that happens in 1933, Germany pulls itself out of the League of Nations. If you'll remember, the League of Nations was that organization that was supposed to prevent future wars from happening. In 1935, Germany starts to build up their military. This happens to be a direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was only allowed to have a military of about 100,000 people. Adolf Hitler pretty much takes the Treaty of Versailles, crumples it up into a ball and chucks it in the trash can, and decides he's going to do whatever he wants to. His main logic is, if we build the military, that's going to give people jobs. Not only people having jobs serving in the military, but also people having jobs in factories building supplies for that military. And finally, 1938, Germany annexes Austria, and then a little bit later they annex an area of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. The idea was the German people needed more room to be able to move around. They were feeling way too crowded. As far as Italy is concerned, Benito Mussolini is really starting to get people stirred up about this whole notion of creating a new Roman Empire. In 1935, Italy begins an invasion of Ethiopia. Real quick brief history of Ethiopia. Prior to 1935, Ethiopia was the only country in Africa that really hadn't ever been colonized or conquered by anyone. Mussolini sort of takes the approach of, let's find the biggest, baddest person in the prison yard and go after him. It actually really pays off for Italy. Ethiopia didn't really have the most modern military. The Italians, on the other hand, were fairly modernized. Ethiopia fell relatively quickly by 1936, and once they fell, the rest of northern Africa kind of followed suit. They looked and saw what happened to the biggest, baddest person on the continent and realized, oh crap, if that could happen to Ethiopia, it's going to happen to us too. A lot of the northern African countries kind of give up pretty easily. Mussolini is well on his way to creating this new Roman Empire that he was dreaming of so much. So how does Europe react to all this stuff going on? Well, the short and sweet of how they react to Italy is they kind of really don't care that much. They let it go. It's not the worst thing that could possibly happen. They're bigger fish to fry. Turns out that bigger fish was a guy named Adolf Hitler. Other European countries, specifically Great Britain and France, the two big dogs on the continent, they start to use a tactic called appeasement. Appeasement is where you grant some sort of concession to your enemy in order to try to keep the peace. In our case with what Germany was doing in the 1930s, Great Britain and France go to Hitler and basically say, hey, if you stop causing trouble, if you stop taking over territories, we'll just kind of let things stand. This is known as the Munich Pact. It was an agreement between Great Britain and France and Germany. Hitler gets to keep Austria and the Sudetenland as long as he promises to stop expanding, to stop taking more territory. And of course Hitler takes the deal. He says, yeah, sure, no problem. We'll be okay with where we're at right here. Great Britain and France feel like they've accomplished something great. So what about the United States? How do they react? Well, President Roosevelt realizes something bad's on the horizon. Let me read real quick a section of a speech that Roosevelt gave called the Quarantine Speech. It was given in 1937. Here's what Roosevelt had to say. When an epidemic of physical disease starts to spread, the community approves and joins in a quarantine of the patients in order to protect the health of the community against the spread of disease. War is a contagion, whether it be declared or undeclared. It can engulf states and people remote from the original scene of hostilities. We are determined to keep out of war, yet we cannot insure ourselves against the disastrous effects of war and dangers of involvement. Basically what FDR is trying to say here is, at some point, what's going on over there in Europe is going to wind up being a problem right here. If we don't open our eyes and get with our buddies Great Britain and France, we're going to have to deal with this eventually. And it'd be better to do it on our own terms than basically have to scramble to cover our butts. Unfortunately, the American people really don't want to hear any of this. Their reaction is, we don't want to have a war. We don't have time for a war. We have bigger things to worry about, namely our economy. We're still dealing with this depression. If we don't get our economy under control, it's just going to wind up being terrible. Not long after the Munich Pact, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany enter into what's known as the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. Germany and the Soviet Union agree not to attack each other for 10 years. Now think about this for a second. Would you be willing to enter into a non-aggression pact where you'd say, hey, I promise that I won't hit you in the face for 10 years if you won't hit me in the face for 10 years? Think about it. You're doing great for 9 years, 11 months, and 29 days or so. But what starts to happen that day before the 10 years expire? If it were me, it would start to make me a little bit nervous. Part of the reason that the Soviets decided to agree to this was secretly they had hatched a plan with Germany to basically take over Poland. Poland was a new country created under the Treaty of Versailles that took a little bit land from Germany and a little bit of land from the Soviet Union or Russia and put it together to make Poland. Neither country was really happy about that, and both countries wanted that land back. Unfortunately, it was also a direct violation of the Munich Pact. Remember that Hitler said he wouldn't take any more territory. And here he is conspiring with Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union to do just that. Well, in 1939, all heck kind of breaks loose. Early in 1939, Hitler goes ahead and takes over the rest of Czechoslovakia. He basically crumples up that Munich Pact and throws it in the trash along with the Treaty of Versailles. Great Britain and France both basically warned that if Hitler goes any farther, if he invades Poland, they're going to have to do something. Then on September 1st, 1939, Hitler goes ahead and invades Poland. Poland really didn't stand a chance. They fell within about a month. This is when World War II officially starts, with Hitler's invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939. 2 days later, on September 3rd, Great Britain and France declare war on Germany. And again, we have to ask the question, how does the United States respond to all this? And the short answer is, they don't want to be involved. They have other things to deal with. Remember the neutrality pacts of 1935, 1936, and 1937? They stick by them. The United States doesn't want to have anything to do with any countries at war, even our friends like Great Britain and France. Now that we've officially declared World War II open, let's take just a second to talk about who's on what side. During the Second World War, we have two main kind of factions or alliances. On the bad guy side, we have what's called the Axis powers. It's Germany, Italy, and Japan. The good guys go through a little bit of change here and there. It starts out with Great Britain and France. Unfortunately, really quickly, after about 2 months, France falls and is kind of taken out of the picture for more or less the rest of the war. Eventually, you're going to have the United States. Some things will happen and we have no choice but to get involved. And we also, on the Allied side, wind up seeing Joseph Stalin because Hitler winds up stabbing him in the back and invading the Soviet Union. Both the United States and the Soviet Union kind of look at the enemy of my enemy is my friend strategy and decide to team up against Hitler along with Great Britain. Okay, so what do we really need to take away from this video? Number one is that in the 1930s, Japan really wanted resources to fuel an empire. Number two, remember that Germany and Italy basically threw the Treaty of Versailles out the window and did whatever they wanted because the League of Nations let them get away with it. And number three, remember that the United States basically did nothing because, well, we had our own problems to deal with the Great Depression. There you go, guys. The coming of war. Hopefully you got good notes. Be ready for that quiz. And as always, till next time, remember, don't stop learning.